The Pentagon has issued a new manual on the rules of war for U.S. soldiers. Though one thing that jumps out is that journalists are now listed as potential combatants. Here's our correspondent, Marina Portnaya.
The new U.S. military playbook for legally waging war is lumping terrorists and journalists under the same category. The Pentagon has officially replaced the term unlawful enemy combatant with unprivileged belligerent, and journalists can be listed under that obscure classification. The fine print is buried on page 173 of the some 1,100-page military guidebook. According to the Department of Defense, quote, "In general, journalists are civilians. However, journalists may be members of the armed forces, persons authorized to accompany the armed forces, or unprivileged belligerents." Unquote. Including journalists under a label reserved for terrorists and enemies is an unprecedented and jarring move by the Pentagon.
I suppose they've found some words that are confusing enough to where the American public really can't question them.
Iraqi war veteran Emily Yates worked as an Army public affairs specialist. She says the Defense Department is using semantics in an effort to censor incriminating details about America's wars.
It seems like it's to give permission to treat journalists from here on out as though they are assumed to be the enemy.
For its part, the Pentagon says the fact that a person is a journalist doesn't prevent that person from becoming an unprivileged belligerent. While some would characterize people who report for Al-Qaeda magazines as journalists, the Pentagon would classify them as unprivileged belligerents. The reason for abandoning the phrase enemy combatant for one that sounds like the description of a spoiled teenager, the Pentagon says it's purely about style. America's new instruction manual on the right and wrong ways to fight and kill the enemy will for the first time apply to all 4 branches of the military. Previously, they had all issued their own law of war guidebooks, which presumably didn't list journalists as potential traitors. Reporting from New York, Marina Portnaya, RT.
Journalism professor Christopher Chambers believes the new manual from the Pentagon gives U.S. troops the green light to get rid of unwanted reporters.
Geneva Convention, other tenets of international law, even the United States, law on this, that federal courts have spoken on this, doesn't have this thing called unprivileged belligerents. I mean, you're either an embedded reporter, you're a reporter for Stars and Stripes with the Army, so you're a member of the armed forces, or you're not. You're either civilian or you're a soldier. But even if you're a soldier, you still have protections under the Geneva Convention. You can't be tortured. You can't be deprived of food, et cetera, et cetera. There are 2 troubling things about this. First, it gives them license to attack or even murder journalists that they don't particularly like but aren't really on the other side. And it can also mean people who are just there observing kind of as neutrals. I mean, it would basically excuse the murder of those journalists that, that made WikiLeaks famous.
The recent shooting in the U.S. town of Charleston has put the specter of homegrown terrorism well and truly in the spotlight. RT's In the Now program entering the debate.
Cops who arrested Dylan Roof took him to Burger King and treated him when the Charleston mass murderer said he was hungry after killing 9 people in church. Why not? It's not like he's a terrorist.
The suspect is a
disturbed young man.
White gunman.
Terrible human being.
FBI Director James Comey says he would not label that crime terrorism.
That's despite Roof being a vehement racist with an ideology of hatred. He wanted to rid America of black people. That's why he killed 9 of them. And then there's this murderer who was 100% a terrorist. No doubt here.
Canada witnessed the first post-9/11 acts of terrorism.
In the days to come, we will learn more about the terrorist.
Today's deadly violence was an act of terror.
A high-profile terrorism.
Terror on Canada's Parliament Hill.
The Canadian shooter who killed a soldier at a war memorial outside the Parliament was almost instantly given the label. That's despite reports that the man was mentally unstable and even received psychological treatment in the past. But there is a difference. The Canadian shooter was Muslim, while the Charleston shooter is white. Glenn Greenwald says that this basically demonstrates the meaningless of the word terrorism. It's just a propaganda term, he says, used by Western media and politicians to describe violence by Muslims against the West. While violence by the white Western man against Muslims, black people, and even fellow white citizens is something other than terrorism.
Good to have you with us today for the program. Despite reports of an imminent sacking, the acting chief of Russia's football union says it's unlikely Fabio Capello will be removed as the coach of the national team just yet, not least because the Italian is still owed millions in unpaid salary. RT's Anastasia Churkina takes a look at the ups and downs of one of sport's highest paid coaches.
It's been quite a saga for Capello and Russian football. The Russian Football Union currently owes the 69-year-old Italian coach roughly 10 million euros after he reportedly stopped being paid last year. With a salary of 7 million euros a year, Capello is the highest paid international manager, with his annual wage enough to pay the Mexican coach 54 times. Ironically, Mexico is ranked higher than Russia by FIFA. Here enters metals billionaire Alisher Usmanov, offering to provide enough to cover the manager's salary debt. A major shareholder of Arsenal Football Club, one of Russia's richest men, with a fortune estimated at 13 billion euros. Meanwhile, as the cash drama unravels, Capello's record in Russia has left much to be desired. Game after game flunked, only 2 have been won out of the recent 10 matches. Against Liechtenstein and Montenegro, the latter awarded to Russia due to crowd chaos and not even good game. In the most recent European qualifier, Russia lost 1-0 to Austria while playing at home. On social media, lots of fans grew impatient, while others expressed sympathy for the under-the-fire football boss. Anastasia Churkina, RT, Moscow.
In brief, some other headlines for you now. A group of Yemeni women holding a demonstration there outside the Attorney General's office in the country's capital. The crowd called for UN action as humanitarian conditions continue to worsen in the country due to the Saudi bombing campaigns. They also demanded the prosecution of the former President Hadi, who fled to Saudi Arabia in March. Hundreds of passengers left stranded at London's St Pancras International train station after Eurostar cancelled all services to France because of protests in Calais. The port workers launched strike action over the sale of 2 ferries, which could lead to the loss of over 100 jobs. The strike has now ended, and train and ferry crossings between France and Britain have resumed. Up next here on RT International, Peter Lavelle and his guests discussing the grim economic situation facing the Ukrainian government. Crosstalk coming your way right here on the network.